Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we're on the website of Ingles and Hayday Auctioneers based in the UK, and we're going to have a look at their latest auction, which is bowed stringed musical instruments. So for those of you that don't know, Ingles and Hayday are one of the top auction houses in the world for bowed stringed instruments. They are what is the remainder of the Sotheby's musical instrument department, which split off. This is a very high level auction, really great stuff, a mixture of books, violins, violas, cellos and bows, and a few other little bits in between. I'm not going to apologise for the fact that I will probably go into this auction in a fair amount of detail, so it might take quite a long time. I shall put kind of chapter references in the YouTube description so that you can kind of flick forward to things like violins, violas, bows, etc. if that's kind of useful. But yes, we will go into this into a fair detail. This auction is actually finishing on the 31st of October. It's the 21st today, so you've got a good 10 days left to go. There are about 310 lots, so it's quite a lot. Buyer's premium is 20% for this auction, so it's what you pay on top of the final hammer price. So whatever the final price is, add 20% of that on top. This is a UK based auction, so if you're overseas, then bear that in mind before you bid. Import, export, CITES restrictions, shipping, all of that kind of fun stuff, you need to take that into account. Before we kind of get onto it, I'd just like to say, if you do enjoy these videos, please consider liking, subscribing or commenting, because it really does help the channel a lot and it would be much appreciated. So I think that's all I've got to say really, other than I think this is going to be one of the best auctions of the year. Very interesting auction. Like I said, we're going to go through it fairly thoroughly and see what we have really. So yeah, let's get on with it. Right, first of all, we don't usually talk about books too much, but we have the Peter Biddulph Guarneri del Gesù books here. These are super popular. I would not be surprised if this sells for over £1,000, because Peter Biddulph really did produce the kind of premier book on del Gesù, and it's, I think, out of print a long time, so this will be a very popular book for a lot of people. Got Eric Blott, one of the leading experts in modern Italian violins, based in Cremona, so this will once again be a popular book, kind of Italian making between 1860 and 1960. This is volume 3, so that will probably be pretty successful as well in the auction. Sidney Bowden, Pajot, bow makers of the 18th and 19th century. See this book a fair amount of times, so interesting if you're curious about that making style. Then we have Louis Caporal and Kiyoshi Osawa, instruments of Annibale Fagnola, so be a curious book for people interested in the work of Fagnola. Very popular maker at the moment, the instrument selling very well. Paul Childs, Jean-Pierre Marie Pessot, his life and work. Paul Childs, the US based bow expert, so if you're interested in the bow maker Jean-Pierre Marie Pessot, then this might be a book for you. Paul Childs again, bow makers of the Picat family. You can probably imagine what that's about. Another interesting book. Dimitri Gindin, modern Italian violin makers. So once again, Dimitri Gindin in the same kind of territory as Eric Blott, very well-known expert on modern Italian violins and older Italian violins as well, but primarily focused on the modern Italian stuff. This another book, very popular, and I'm sure that will sell well as well, especially as everyone's interested in modern Italian violins at the moment. So here we have the classic violin iconography of Antonio Stradivari. You see that quite a lot. Walter Hammer, master Italian kind of makers. This is a standard book that you see quite a lot. Another one here, another copy. Still goes for okay money. Well, there's 3, so a lot to choose from here. Walter Hammer then again, so of the German school of making, volumes 1 and 2. Got the Hill book on Antonio Stradivari, his life and work. It's a good book, that. Here's the Hill version, but of the Guarneri family here, and also with the little kind of pamphlet there. the advertising pamphlet for it. Hill and Sons, violin makers of the Guarneri family. That's another edition. John Milnes and Derek Wilson, the Hill Bow Makers. Really interesting book if you're interested in the Hill shop and the bow makers. Good book there. Claude Lebet, Ledoux Stradivarius de Domenico Dragonetti there. There you go. The Stu Dragonetti and his 2 Stradivari violins. Not actually seen that book listed before, I'll be honest. Richard Sadler, Arthur Bultitude in the Hill tradition. Once again, they go talking about some of the Hill kind of makers there. Arthur Bultitude, one of the kind of top Hill bow makers. Etienne Vatelot, L'Arche Français, so French bows. Etienne Vatelot again. Once again, this is one of the top books on French bows, so very popular again. Luteria Piedmontese makers there. I'd quite like to have a look in that book actually at some point. Right, a photograph and autograph of Zeno Francescati. Okay, 2 to 300. Absolutely terrible at pronouncing names, as you probably realised. An autograph and concert program of Jascha Heifetz there, 2 to 400. That might well go for more than that. Obviously, Heifetz, one of the most kind of famous violinists of kind of modern-ish times. A photograph and autograph of Lady Hala. There you go. Interesting. 2 to 300. That might well be popular as well. Photograph and autograph of Fritz Kreisler. Once again, another extremely famous violinist. Photograph and autograph of Jan Kubelik. 2 to 300 on that. A print of Niccolo Paganini there. The great master. An engraved portrait of Niccolo Paganini there. Interesting. Photograph and autograph of Ephraim Zimbalist, 2 to 300. Interesting autographs in this. A mahogany and brass duet music stand by Sebastian Erard. Interesting. Wow, 1000 to 2000. Obviously, Erard, great maker of harps and pianos, amongst other things. So, I wasn't aware that they made music stands, but there we go. You learn something every day in these auctions. Double violin case, Italy, 18th century. Wooden case in Morocco, leather. Okay, sold with a certificate of Dimitri Masafia and Cremona, the kind of expert in Cremona on cases. Nice gentleman. 4 to 6,000 there, the estimate. It's quite a lot to pay for a case, but it is an interesting one. Right, we're on to instruments now. Brilliant. A violin by Émile Humbert, Paris circa 1920, 6 to 8,000 on that. That's quite a lot of pictures here. I'm not sure we're going to look at every picture for every instrument, as that might be a bit much. Violin by Azzo Rovescali, Milan. Oh, sorry, born in Milan, but from Lodi, 1926. 10 to 15,000 on that. You can also hear sound samples and all other kind of things if you really want to look into it. Interesting F-holes on that instrument. So I think we will probably just look at the other views for the top tier instruments. We'll stick to the front, back and scroll for most of them. Violin by Matthias Thier there of Vienna, 6 to 8,000 with 2 bows there. A violin by Emil Hjorth and Son, Copenhagen. Nice family of makers, 7 to 10 on that. Violin by Sebastian Klotz, the second, Mittenwald, 1778, 6 to 8,000 on that. nice example of a Klotz violin. Violin by Charles Boulanger, London, 1888. Sold with a certificate of Jean-Jacques Rampal, 7 to 10,000. I think Boulanger did a couple of different types of instruments, different varnishes, some a bit more plain. This I think is one of his kind of plainer instruments. There are others I think are a bit more his personal models, which are a bit more interesting, but very good maker, one of the many French makers that moved over to London. Violin by Justin Derazy, Miracle, 1863, 4 to 6 on that. Another one with a Rampal certificate there. Not a super exciting instrument in my opinion, but still probably quite a good instrument. Violin by Vincenzo Carcassi, Florence, 1763, with a Hill certificate there, 35.2 length the back, 20 to 30 on that. Do remember that you can request condition reports, and also there are sound samples that we won't get into, but interesting model, curious kind of scroll there, very interesting scroll that. It's quite a nice instrument, so fair kind of estimate there. Violin After Guarneri del Gesù by John Frederick Lott, London, circa 1860. Few certificates there, 40 to 60. One of the kind of top English makers. Interesting looking violin this. Interesting kind of Guarneri model. It's got a certificate of beer from 1975 and a letter from Horth and Son, Copenhagen. Interesting looking violin. Violin After Guarneri del Gesù by Georges Chanot the First, circa 1850. So we've got a lot of violins after del Gesù there, 30 to 50,000 on that. Violin by William Arthur Beer. Okay, interesting. 3 to 5,000. London, 1928. I don't recall seeing many violins actually by member or older members of the Beer family. I've seen quite a few Peter Beer violins, recent ones, but not any of the older members of the family. Kind of interesting model there. A fairly low estimate. Violin by John Simpson, London, circa 1750, 3 to 5. Kind of entry-level way into an English 18th century instrument there. I think these are quite nice. Violin by W.E. Hill and Sons, London, 1889, is fairly kind of early one actually. There, I think from not too long after the start of the shop itself, rather than the individual making of the family. Some of these Hill violins are really, really beautiful. Others are not so exciting. This one looks kind of interesting enough, but some of them have a really curious kind of translucent varnish to them. 8 to 12,000, it's not too bad. If you were to buy a violin from the reimagined Hill and Sons, which is now existing kind of in London, you'd probably be paying like 40 to 50,000 pounds. So why not get one from 100 plus years ago? It's a good opportunity. Violin by John Kennedy, London, 1759, 4 to 6,000, labelled Cahusac. Interesting. So Kennedy, one of the makers that's kind of popular for cellos, I think, more than violins, but once again another opportunity to have quite a nice 18th century English violin for not too bad a price. Interesting model. Violin by Giuseppe Castagnino, Genoa 1927, certificate of Dimitri Gindin there, 18 to 25,000. Looks like quite a nice model there. 35.9, fairly large length of back. A violin, France, late 19th century, labelled N. Ordino for Nestor Ordino. Quite nice back on that. 46,000, 35.9, pretty long in that kind of typical French way of that period. A violin attributed to Lorenzo Storioni, North Italy, 18th century, sold with a receipt from J&A Beer, 1957, 15 to 25,000. Quite a plain looking instrument there. Interesting placement of the F-holes, pretty close together there. A fairly plain instrument overall. So, but interesting enough. A violin by Ansaldo Poggi, Bologna, 1971. One of the top modern Italian makers of the 20th century. They're 80 to 120,000. Very popular maker of the at the moment. Violin by Annibale Fagnola. There we go, 70 to 100,000. Another top tier 20th century Italian maker there. Quite a nice looking instrument, actually. Nice back on this. I'm sure that will do pretty well. 70 to 100,000. A violin, mid-19th century, labelled Petrus Palestieri. Interesting, 4 to 6,000 on that. Interesting scroll, not a lot to say on that. A violin after Guadagnini by Enrico Marchetti there, Turin, between 1925 and 1930. Certificate of Eric Blott of Cremona there, 15 to 20,000 on that. A kind of interesting heavy edge work on that, not so much to my taste, I must be honest. Violin by George William Hudson, 6 to 8,000, popular English maker. Violin by Vincenzo Cennino, another kind of popular maker, that kind of early 20th century period, 18 to 25,000. Certificate of Runing and Son there. A violin by Justin Darazi here again, 4 to 6. I think a little bit nicer than the earlier one. A violin, Circle of John Betts, London, circa 1800, labelled T. Dodd. Sold a certificate of LP Barmforth and Son, Leeds. Oh, there's a notice. The cataloguing for this item should be a violin, Circle of John Betts. Okay, interesting. 6 to 8,000. Yeah, not too bad, not super exciting. Violin by Antonio Gragnani, Livorno, circa 1780. 70 to 100,000. Nice maker, not super exciting to me, but popular maker. Good 18th century Italian violin. Violin by Vincenzo Postiglione, another kind of good late 19th, early 20th century maker. Featured in Dimitri Gindrin's The Modern Italian Violin Makers. Right, there you go, 45 to 60,000. Violin by Giovanni Cavani, Modena, 1935, 5 to 8,000 there. 35.6 length of back. A way to get a cheaper 20th century Italian violin there. Slightly curious outline of that. A violin by Camillo Mandelli, Buenos Aires, 1905. That's interesting. I think a few Italian makers went over to South America way. 8 to 12 on that. Violin by Maurice Mermillot, Paris, 1877, with a Rampal certificate, 7 to 10. French violins, always popular. A violin by Auguste Sébastien Philippe Bernardel, Paris, 1832, 20 to 30 on this. Very popular French maker. Looks like quite a solid example. Violin by Tommaso Balistieri, Mantua, circa 1795. The scroll probably later. There's another cell room notice. Let's have a look at this. Please note the catalogue description has been amended to include the scroll probably later. Okay, 80 to 120,000. One of the top Mantuan makers. Very kind of distinctive individual work. Kind of curious scroll on that. Be interesting to see this in person, but one of the makers that's always fairly higher up in the price levels. Violin by Vincenzo Ruggieri, Cremona, circa 1700, 80 to 120,000. Nice looking back on that. One of the kind of top Cremonese families. Later scroll possibly by Vincenzo Sannino. Okay, interesting. Violin by Roger and Max Millant, Paris, 1942, 4 to 6. I think we saw some instruments by Roger and Max Millant at one of the Vichy sales recently. Not necessarily super exciting work, but interesting enough. A violin by Benoit Fleury, Paris, 1758. 10 to 15,000. Nice to see some 18th century French work. Nice F-holes. I definitely prefer the 18th century French work to the later work. I'm probably the only person that thinks like that, but that is my opinion, my preference. Ex-Norman Rosenberg, so a violin, probably Naples, circa 1900. I presume that this is one that was sold before and maybe it's come back, or maybe one slipped the net of being sold. Hard to really say anything from that. Violin by Annibale Fagnola. Wow, there's a few of them in here. 30 to 50,000 there. Interesting looking varnish on that. Slightly odd. A violin by Giovanni Francesco Presenda, Turin, circa 1827 to 9, 100 to 150,000, with a Peter Bidoff certificate. One of the top Italian makers of the 19th century. Really, really nice work. A violin by Antonio and Girolamo Amati, wonderful. Cremona, circa 1620, excellent. Sold with a certificate of Émile Francais from 1962. John Dilworth wrote an article about it. 220 to 320,000. Brilliant, really lovely, beautiful looking instrument there. Really incredible. Look at that kind of varnish there. So this is a real nice Cremonese instrument by the Amati family. Really great. That's a lovely instrument there. Definitely the best that we have seen in this auction so far, and I'm not necessarily directed by name or value, but this is a beautiful instrument without a shadow of a doubt. Oh, we're on to bows now. Silver mounted violin bow by Charles Alfred Bazin, that 1800 to 2.5. We're not going to go super deep into bows unless there's something really interesting. It's an Usha bow there, 2 to 4. Silver mounted violin bow, Hill and Sons there, 2.5 to 3.5. Solid bows. Another Hill bow there, 2.5 to 3.5. Silver mounted violin bow, Hills, 3 to 5. They always have lots of Hill bows, Ingles and Hayday. Another Hill bow. This is an interesting one with ivory mounts here, I think. So you have to beware of that on the CITES kind of restrictions, 3 to 5. Don't see those ones too often. That was an ex-Rosenberg collection as well. Another ex-Rosenberg. Nickel mounted violin bow by Jean-Joseph Martin. Okay. Silver mounted violin bow by Celestin Emile Clasquin. It's a nice bow there. Silver mounted violin bow by Joseph Alfred Lamy, 6 to 8. We're getting into higher territory there. Another Joseph Alfred Lamy bow there. And a bow by Andre Vigneron, 7 to 10. Victor Fatigue, 4 to 6. Pierre Guillaume certificate there. Silver mounted violin bow by Roger Francois Lotte there, 1200 to 1800. Marie-Louise Piano bow there. Nicolas Maire, 25 to 35,000. So we're getting into serious French territory there. It has the Cabinet des Archetiers certificate there, which includes Mr. Rampel in that grouping of experts. Silver mounted violin bow by Nicolas Maire, 20 to 30. Silver mounted violin bow by Pierre Simon, 25 to 35. Another Pierre Simon there, 22 to 28. I think we'll try and move on to the next one. Silver mounted violin bow by Jérôme Thibouville Lamy, so on the lower tier French there. Another JTL bow, but they're still pretty good bows. Right, Eugene Sartre, 22 to 28,000. As I've been saying recently, this is the popular maker of the moment. Another Sartre there, 20 to 30, and you expect to see a few of these in these auctions. Another one here, 16 to 20. Another one, wow, there's quite a few here, 10 to 15. Heavy wear there on that stick. Albert Nürnberger, really good German bow maker there. Silver mounted violin bow by Richard Weitkold. As with all these things, the kind of estimate is a bit kind of irrelevant. You have to try these things out in person and see if they work or not. So we've got silver mounted violin bow by Dominique Pacat there, circa 1860. Isaac Salcho certificate there, top kind of experts in the US, 30 to 50. Another Dominique Pacat there, 20 to 30. Francois Pacat there, 28 to 35. Dominique Pacat, wow, that's really quite a lot. That was an ex-Rosenberg one. Silver mounted violin bow by Paul Miquel. And silver mounted violin bow by Celestin Emile Clasquin. Charles Nicolas Bazin, 2 to 3. Another Charles Nicolas Bazin there. And another one. Oh, 4. Quite a few. Right, we're on to cellos now. A cello, France, circa 1900. 5 to 7, nothing too crazy there. Cello by Henry J, London, 1783. Cello was purchased from Henry J or Longman and Broderick by the Reverend William Kinleside, okay, rector of Angmering. Okay, interesting. 6 to 8,000 on that. A cello by Thomas Dodd. Interesting, 35 to 50,000 there. It's a curious looking cello. See if there's any further pictures. Okay. And a cello by Etienne Laprevotte, Paris 1839, 6 to 8 on that. Cello by Thomas Kennedy, 25 to 35,000 on that. 3/4 size cello by Lorenzo Storioni. Wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. 80 to 120,000. It's curious to see a 3/4 size cello. Very interesting outline to that. That is pretty strange. Yeah, that is quite a rarity. A composite cello, South Germany, circa 1890. The front and scroll possibly by George Warm Hudson. Okay. Yeah, curious looking strip at the back, 5 to 7. A cello, England, mid 18th century, and 3 cello bows there, 8 to 10,000. Got a nice looking instrument. Cello by Raphael and Antonio Galliano, Naples, 1860, 100 to 150,000 on that. Silver mounted cello by Eugene Cuneo Huri there. Cello bow by Carl Wilhelm Knopf. Gold mounted cello bow by Jules Fatigue, around 28 to 35,000. That's quite significant. An Etienne Pajot cello bow there, 18 to 25. Silver mounted cello bow by Francois Nicolas Vara, 5 to 7. Nickel mounted cello bow by Auguste Barbe, 4 to 6. JTL cello bow there. Victor Fatigue, 5 to 7 on that. A silver mounted cello bow by Ushar, 5 to 7. Silver mounted cello bow by Louis Joseph Morizot, 2.5 to 3. Silver mounted double bass bow by Alfred Lamy Nouveau, okay, 3 to 5. Nickel mounted cello bow by Georges Emile Bargenet, 18 to 2.5. Another cello bow by Charles Nicholas Bazar there. Another Charles Nicholas Bazar. Cello bow by Hill and Sons, 2.5 to 3.5. And a cello bow by Eugene Cuneo Huri, 2 to 3. Right, we're on to violins again. A violin attributed to Giovanni Bossone, 5 to 8. That's quite a nice looking instrument so far. A violin by Francesco Bisolotti, Cremona, 1977, 10 to 15,000. Violin, Klotzskull, Mittenwald, circa 1800, 4 to 6 on that. Violin attributed to Antonio Scarbi, North Italy, 1920, 10 to 15 on that. Violin attributed to George Warm Hudson, that's quite a striking back on that, 4 to 6. A violin, School of Claude Pirot, 7 to 10. A violin, Austria, late 18th century, with a Chilianatus label there. Sold a certificate of Lebert and Magni, describing the violin as 18th century Italian, 4 to 6. Well, you can kind of see potentially why they might have said that from the back. It's quite an interesting looking back on this instrument, so you could see why they might have that thought. Nice looking violin there, 4 to 6. That's not a bad price, really. Bad estimate at all. Violin by Gandon Bernadelle, 18 to 25,000. Very popular in the orchestras. A violin probably by Jacob Steiner, Absam, circa 1670. Estimate has been amended to 20 to 30,000, 35.4. That is quite a staggering back on this instrument, really. Wow, look at that kind of bird's eye. Really, really interesting figure. Really crazy wood on that. Let's have a look at the angle on that. Wow, really quite something. That is very interesting back on that instrument for sure. It's very beautiful. Violin by Matteo Goffrilla, Venice, circa 1750 to 80. Interesting, 35 centimeters there. It's quite small. That's kind of curious. Quite nice back. It'd be interesting to see the condition report on this one. It seems fairly low estimate. Violin Calston School, Mirkov, 4 to 6. Some of these instruments can be really, really good. Violin by Pietro Grulli, Cremona, 1890, 25 to 35,000 on that. Violin by Jean-Baptiste Nagini, Paris, 1928, 4 to 6 on that. Violin by Secondo Bianchini, Cremona, 1953. Sold with certificate of Dmitry Gindin, 7 to 10. That's quite a plain looking instrument. A violin after G.B. Guadagnini by George Stoppani, Manchester, 1991. 4 to 6. I think we've seen a few Stoppani instruments before. That's not too bad. Violin by Rodolfo Tremonti, 1968, on Forley. Dmitry Gindin certificate there as well. Quite a nice figure on the back there. Nice flame. Violin attributed to Giovanni Pistucci, 6 to 8. It's again quite nice varnish on that. I quite like it. This is quite nice. Nice varnish, quite nice choice of wood. 35.9, fairly long length of back. A composite violin, Italy, late 18th century. Sticker of Hill and Sons, describing the violin as Milanese school. Okay. Circa 1760, 15 to 25. Interesting looking violin. A violin, Venice, late 18th century. The scroll by Domenico Montignana there. 70 to 100,000. Nice back on that as well. Kind of curious F-holes there. A violin by Francesco and Giuseppe Guadagnini, Turin, 1896, 35 to 50,000. Kind of a later Guadagnini family instrument. That's interesting to see. And a violin here, Circle of Matthew Hardy, Scotland, early 19th century, 1800 to 2,500. Quite a low estimate for an Ingles and Hayday auction. Another ex-Norman Rosenberg. I think I do remember that one actually. Violin circa 1900, labelled Paul Jambard, 3 to 5. A violin by Francois Lupeau, Orléans, late 18th century, 7 to 10. Interesting. Labelled Jacobus Steiner. Seems fairly low estimate for that. That's kind of curious. 35.7 centimeters. Violin ascribed to Andrea Castagneri, France, 18th century, 4 to 6. It's quite amazing the discrepancy on prices, really. A nice looking instrument, that. Violin by Gaetano Santagiuliana, Vicenza, circa 1800, 30 to 50,000 there. Really beautiful back on that. Quite like the varnish, like the outline in F-hole placement as well. A violin by Giovanni Dolens, Trieste, there, 35 to 50,000. Wow, the scroll on that is incredible. That is a brilliant scroll. That is really fascinating. Let's see if we can look at this a bit more detail. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a brilliant scroll. I really like that. That's quite curious. A violin by Gaetano Venaccia, sold with certificate of Dmitry Gindin, 2023. So this is interesting because this instrument I know for sure sold at Amati Auctions, I think either earlier in the year or last year, and now it has a Dmitry Gindin certificate. I think it sold for mid 25,000 or something, maybe a bit more, 28,000 at Amati, so it's up for a bit higher now. So curious. Nice looking violin in person, something potentially a bit odd with the varnish. Violin for J.B. Viome by Nicholas Viome, 6 to 8,000 on that, 36 centimeters the length. And a violin, interesting, possibly Milan, 18th century, 15 to 20,000. Oh, that's a really odd kind of outline. Very strange looking instrument, 15 to 20,000. That's the kind of quirky thing I quite like, but that is quite odd looking. A violin, France, circa 1830, labelled Lupo. It's again nice looking back on that. That's quite a nice instrument, 4 to 6, 35.8. So that's a curious one. Violin by the Viola brothers, the famous copyists, London circa 1900, 15 to 20,000, labelled Paolo Antonio Testore there. Nice looking instrument. Violin by Angelo Molia, Genoa, 1760. Interesting, 30 to 40,000. Instrument was illustrated in the January 1974 edition. Not a maker I know much about at all, so interesting to see this. Nice scroll on that, 30 to 40. A violin, Circle of Michelangelo Bergonzi, Cremona, mid to late 18th century. This is another ex-Norman Rosenberg one, 70 to 100,000. That is a bonkers back on that. It really is pretty mad looking. Really interesting though, isn't it? That is a curious back. Violin, probably William Forster III, London, circa 1800. Labelled, this violin is in our judgment the work of William Forster, signed Hart and Son. Interesting, 5 to 7,000. That's a curious thing to write inside a violin. A violin, Italy, 19th century, scroll later, sold a certificate of W.E. Hills and Sons, attributing the violin to Cerruti School. Okay, interesting, 15 to 20,000. A violin by Lucien Schmidt, Grenoble, 1948-46. Cool back on that. A little bit rounded in the shape. Violin, Circle of Stefano Scarampella, probably Mantua, early 20th century, 2230 on that. Nice back. Yep, interesting looking violin. Violin by Camillo Camilli, one of the top Mantuan makers, 100 to 150,000 there. Sold a certificate of Runing and Sons there from 2018. That's a really nice colour to that varnish. That's quite beautiful. Let's have a bigger look at this. That's a nice looking instrument. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think one of the more interesting violins in the auction so far. A violin by Carlo Tononi, Bologna, circa 1710, 140 to 180. Violin by Nicholas Lupo, Paris, 1810, 180 to 250,000. Provenance, let's have a look. This violin has been the property of John Daly since 1961. Was the second violin of the Guarneri Quartet alongside Arnold Steinhardt, Michael Tree and David Sawyer. They considered one of the finest string quartets of the 20th century, and the Lupo can be heard on their extensive discography. There you go, interesting provenance there. Nice looking instrument, one of the top French makers, 180 to 250,000, so good to see something other than Italian violins there. Right, back to bows. Ex-Norman Rosenberg silver mounted violin bow for Hart and Sons, 6 to 800. This is a lot lower than the normal stuff that Ingles and Hayday would sell. Another silver mounted violin bow, so potentially this is stuff that didn't sell in the last sale. Interesting ivory mounted violin bow. Curious head on that, it's really quite bonkers, but interesting. Gold and tortoiseshell mounted violin bow for Karl Albert Nürnberger, so by Karl Albert Nürnberger, 8 to 12,000. Good German maker there. Another Albert Nürnberger there. Another Nürnberger. They really are pretty good bows there. Richard Grunke, another great German maker there. Morizot bow there. Malines School bow. Francois Lot, 2 to 3. James Tubbs, good English maker there. Another James Tubbs. I think Ingles and Haydays always have quite a lot of James Tubbs bows. Yeah, 2 to 4. Another one there. Probably Thomas Tubbs bow. Okay, interesting looking bow there. 2 to 3. Really kind of interesting head there. Quite aggressive looking. Bow by Christian Wilhelm Friedrich Knopf II, another good German bow maker. Fretschner bow, another good kind of bow making family. Morizot bow there. Sartre, we're back in Sartre territory again. Another Sartre, 7 to 10. And a bow by Joseph Arthur Vigneron, 6 to 8. Another Vigneron bow. Knopf school bow there. Ex Rosenberg, that seems a bit lower quality for the normal stuff. Some more bow sticks there. I think this is left over from the Rosenberg auction. A gold tortoiseshell mounted violin bow by Arthur Richard Bultitude there. 1,500 to 2,000. Seems kind of fairly low. It's had some heavy wear there on the stick. Silver mounted violin bow by George Frederick Schwartz there, 20 to 30. That's interesting. Strasbourg. Silver mounted violin bow by Francois Lupo II, 10 to 15,000. Yeah, some good French bow territory there. A silver mounted violin bow by Nicolas Simon, 10 to 15. Louis Simon Pajot, interesting frog there, 8 to 12. Justin Poisson, Picat school bow there. Morizot again, a bit simple looking. Emile Francois Houchard. Francois Lot. Claude Thomasin bow there. Piano. Right, back to instruments. We're on violas now. Viola by Francois Lejeune, Paris, 1750, 3 to 5. Seems pretty low estimate really for an 18th century French viola. 40.5 as well, quite a good size for a modern player. Viola by Honoré Darazi, 8-12, 39.7 back on that, a little bit smaller. A viola, Circle of Otto Mokel, 4-6 on that. Viola by Fernandino Ferroni, Florence, 1936, 15 to 20,000 on that, 40.3 length of back. Viola by Wilfred G. Saunders, 3 to 5,000, labelled Edwin Leslie. I think Wilfred Saunders was one of the founders of the Newark School, and he labelled all of his instruments were named, I believe. A viola, probably Milan, early 20th century, labelled Eugenio Praga, 10 to 15,000. Viola by Janos Toth, Budapest, 1942, 5 to 8 on that. A decorated viola by Caressa and Francais, Paris, 1904, 10 to 15,000 there. Labelled Caressa and Francais. Interesting. Let's carry on. Viola by Richard Tobin, London, 1820, 14 to 18,000 there. 38.9, it's one of the smaller kind of sizes of viola. Viola by Max Moller II, Amsterdam, 1957, 5 to 8. 42.1, that's actually fairly big modern size. Viola by Gand and Bernadelle, 15 to 20,000, Paris, 1888. A really weird looking varnish on this instrument. Really looks quite washed out, pretty strange. 41.3 length of back. Not too keen on that. A Tertis model viola by Arthur Richardson, Crediton, 1949, 4 to 6,000. I think it was Arthur Richardson that kind of worked with Lionel Tertis to make this kind of model of viola, I believe. I could be wrong. Interesting. Viola by Gaetano Gionelli, Mantua, circa 1860, 39.5, 15 to 20,000. Pretty odd outline there. Viola by Katsumitsu Nakamura, Milan, 1988. Interesting. 8 to 12,000 on that, 40.6 length of back. A viola, Naples, early 20th century, labelled Vincenzo Cennino, 10 to 15,000, 40.5. A viola by Edward Panormo, Brighton, 1877. Okay, interesting. 7 to 10,000 there. Yeah, that's pretty curious. Interesting to see that. So let's see what else we got here. Got a viola by Francesco Marizzi Ascoli Piceno, circa 1840. Okay, certificate of Dimitri Gindin again, 15 to 20,000 there, 38.4 length of back. So it's pretty small. Let's see what else we got here. A viola by Giacomo and Leandro II Biziak. Okay, Milan, 1962. Sold with certificate of the makers, dated 1972, 18 to 25,000. Interesting. 42 centimeters, so it's a pretty good size for a modern player. Maybe a bit big for some people, but not bad. A silver mounted viola bow by C. Jochen Schmidt. Silver mounted viola bow Dodd School. Nickel mounted viola bow by Roger Francois Lott. Silver mounted viola bow by Eugene Sartre, that 18 to 25,000. Viola Bow by Nicholas Molina 8 to 12. Nickel mounted viola bow by Francois Pacat 7 to 10. And Auguste Houchard viola bow there. Viola bow by Jacques Ordino. Silver mounted viola bow by C. Joachim Schmidt. Silver mounted viola bow by JTL. Golden tortoiseshell mounted viola bow by Arthur Richard Bultitude 3 to 5. Silver mounted viola bow by Francois Lotte. And silver mounted viola bow by Georges Adolphe Chanot. Silver mounted viola bow by Thomas M. Gerbeth. Silver mounted violin bow by JTL there. Nickel mounted violin bow by Emile Francois Houchard. Silver mounted violin bow by James Dodd. Silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hill & Sons. Gold mounted violin bow by William Watson 1980. Silver and tortoiseshell mounted violin bow by Arthur Richard Bultitude there, 1800 to 2.5. Silver mounted violin bow by Emmanuel Carlier, Paris 2022. Okay, interesting to see such a modern bow in a sale. Certificate of the maker 2.5 to 3.5 there. Nickel mounted violin bow by Maurice Frère. And a silver mounted violin bow by Roger Francois Lotte there. JTL bow. Johann Wilhelm Knopf bow. Another Knopf bow there. Bow by Auguste Moritz Knopf. A bow by Leopold Frechner there, 2 to 3. Violin bow by Roger Francois Lotte. JTL bow there as well. Emile Auguste Houchard bow. Joseph Henri bow there, 8 to 12. Charles Pacat, so nice bow there with a Pierre Guillaume certificate there, 7 to 10. A silver mounted violin bow by Francois Lupeau II, 4 to 6. Silver mounted violin bow for Violin, probably by Jean Pessot, 4 to 6. Silver mounted violin bow by Maurice Frère, 1500 to 2. Nickel mounted violin bow by Jean-Joseph Martin. Silver mounted violin bow by Francois Lotte. Definitely a lot of bows in this auction. Bow by Jean-Joseph Martin, 6 to 8. Another JJM bow there. And another one. Wow, there's quite a few in this auction. Well, and they continue. Well, another one, Circle of this time. School of Charles Nicholas Bazin, 2 to 3. Silver mounted violin bow after Tubbs. A silver mounted violin bow by Auguste Lenoble. A silver mounted violin bow Pajot School. Another violin bow by Jean-Joseph Martin. Lots of those bows in this auction. Another Bazin bow there. Right, we're back to violins, and I think we've probably got 35 violins left, and that's kind of it. Violin Circle of Honoré Derazy, 5 to 7 on that. Violin Circle of Georges Chanot the First, 8 to 12. Interesting looking instrument. A violin probably by Giovanni Gaida, 6 to 8. Violin by Sébastien Villaume, Paris 1865, 18 to 25,000 on that. A violin by Luigi Ravati, Buenos Aires, 4 to 6 on that. And a violin by Pietro Cateni, Livorno, circa 1800, 20 to 30,000, 50, 35, sorry, 0.2 is the length of the back. That's an interesting looking violin. That's a lot of charm to it. That's a curious one. A violin attributed to Giovanni Cavani, late 19th century, 3 to 5. Quite a nice looking violin there actually for 3 to 5, not too bad. A violin, Italy, early 19th century, 10 to 15. A violin by Pietro Antonio Landolfi, Milan, circa 1780. He's got a bow stamped Nürnberger with it as well. Florian Leonhard certificate, 40 to 60 on that. Nice scroll on that. I do like a good Landolfi scroll. Violin by Pietro Antonio Dalla Costa, Treviso, circa 1750, 40 to 60, which I think is a really great price for Dalla Costa. It's not super exciting example, but yeah, it's very interesting. Violin circle of Thomas Kennedy there, 4 to 6. Violin by Genuzio Carletti, Piero de Cento, 1980, 10 to 15,000. Quite like the wood on the back there. Eric Blot certificate. A violin at Flanders, 18th century, labelled Gio Giorgio Tanegard, 3 to 5. Quite like that. That's an interesting model. Quite cool scroll. A violin Darazi School, 3 to 5. A violin by Edmund Ayrton, London, 1761, 8 to 12. That's an interesting English violin. Violin by Antonio Venaccia, Naples, circa 1780, 25 to 35,000. Let's see what else we got here. A violin probably by Pietro Antonio Landolfi, Milan, circa 1770. Scroll later, 30 to 50. Interesting. Violin by Edward Withers and Sons, London, circa 1880. 4 to 6 on that. Violin by Matthias Albani, Bolzano, 1702. Sold a certificate of Beers Violins Limited, 2023. Interesting. 18 to 25,000 on that. Seems not unreasonable. A violin by Justin Darazi. Wow, there's lots of Darazi violins in this cell. Interesting. Violin workshop of Vincenzo Jorio, Naples, mid-19th century. Dimitri Gindin certificate there, 8 to 12. Once again, quite a characterful instrument. Violin by Giovanni Floriano Guidanti, Bologna, head later. Quite a nice back on that. Interesting. A violin by Carlo Antonio Testore, Milan, circa 1750, 80 to 120,000. Interesting looking model. A violin by Ermino Malaguti, Milan, 1971, 4 to 6 the estimate there. A violin by Giovanni Battista Bodio, Venice, circa 1825 to 30. Born into a family of musicians, primarily a violinist. Probably trained as a violin maker with his uncle Giuseppe Bodio, who had worked in the Serafin workshop. Interesting, 20 to 30,000. Good to get a nice bit of history in there. Violin ascribed to Vincenzo Annaruma, mid-20th century, 5 to 8. A violin by Gerlando Terrana, Milan, 1954, 7 to 10 on that. A violin by Jean-Baptiste Vuillaume, Paris, circa 1874, varnished after his death. Interesting. Sold a certificate of Jean-Jacques Rampal, 60 to 80,000. That's curious. That is probably the cheapest that you would be able to buy a Vuillaume violin, I think, at the moment, or potentially in the future in general. A violin by Niccolo Amati, Cremona, 1666, 100 to 150,000 there. With 2 gold-mounted violin bows. Interesting. Scroll later, probably 19th century English. Quite curious. Still quite interesting that you could potentially get a Niccolo Amati violin for 100 to 150,000. That seems quite low, really. Would be interesting to see the condition report on this one. 35.3 length of back. Curious one. A violin circle of Justin Darazi. Wow, I think I've never seen so many Darazi violins or associated violins in any auction before. A violin, probably Naples, 19th century, 6 to 8. And a violin attributed to Gaetano Ciocci, late 19th century, 3.5 to 5. Interesting outline on this one. Quite curious. A violin by Auguste Sebastian Philippe Bernardel, Paris, 1828, 28,000 to 35,000. Nice back on that. That's very nice. A violin by Giovanni Francesco Presenda, Turin, 1835, certificate of Florian Leonhard. Also this one seems a bit lower as well. There's a few bits which I think need to be, some cheek patches and things. Looks like it's had a fair bit of work done to it. Might be reflective of the estimate there. A violin by Carlo Ferdinando Landolfi, Milan, circa 1750. 100 to 150,000. That's a nice looking back as well. That's a nice kind of varnish to it. That's a nice looking instrument. And is that potentially it? I think that is it. We are at the end of the auction, I think, or is there something else? Nope, there's one more. Sorry, I lied. A violin by Giuseppe Guarneri, also known as Filius Andrei, Cremona, circa 1710, certificate of Runing and Sons, 250 to 350,000. There you go. That is the top item in this auction. That once again is another nice looking instrument for sure. I think that is very nice, quite plain but interesting varnish. Curious F holes. Interesting violin by a member of the Guarneri family, and that's it basically. That is the entirety of the Ingles Hayday auction. So pretty curious one, to be fair. Lots of interesting stuff. I think they've had better auctions before. I think definitely the Rosenberg auctions were probably slightly better, but otherwise they are, it's pretty interesting. Definitely worth checking out. I suggest have a look at the catalogue yourself, see what you think. I like the violin kind of attributed to Steiner and the Amati violin. I think that is very nice. I think my top pick would be the Amati. I think that is probably the nicest instrument in the sale, in my opinion. This violin by Antonio and Girolamo Amati, 1620, beautiful instrument. So yeah, check out the sale, link in the description. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Ciao.